This is Andrew Carnie from Southampton University, and of course, one of our splendid artists.
I am going to flash through some earlier work. I want to say a very brief amount about it. I came from a science background and then kind of swapped and dropped out because I had a burgeoning desire to make kind of artwork, and I don't really understand why, because it happened a long time ago. So, you know, I went down that kind of other route, and I've made work for a long time, other types of work, and I kind of came into re-looking at some of the things that I'd been interested in when I was looking at science and when I was trying to become a scientist. I mean, I went to do zoology and ended up doing psychology. I was very interested in behavior, and that has a kind of root in everything. And then there was a sudden kind of, I got a warning really about my practice. I was told that I was addicted to suitcases and that I should change. And I bore that in mind after about 10 years, and I also had a lot of suitcases. So I moved on, and I started becoming interested in the things that I'd been interested in before, and really it was centered around the brain. And so I've been making work with scientists for more than 10 years now, like 14, 15 years, in one way or another, lots of different collaborations. I'm going to flick through some of this earlier stuff, because I just want it to set a kind of context, really. I've made pieces with neurologists. It's not very easy to see the slides, but they're often projection, and they're slow dissolve spaces where things arise and disappear. Very interested at this point in really how the brain changes and moves, and you know, it's not a static thing. I was always taught as a kid that it's a static thing, in the sense you get to 18, your brain freezes, that's it. But all the research kind of suggested other things, and it became much more interesting. And so I tried to make a piece that's over time kind of changes and builds and increases, and it's made with foils, and you can kind of walk between it. You can't really see very well on the slide, but you also get incredible shadows, which again you can't see. You can see somebody looming in these very large projection pieces. I'm just going to flick through a rest so that I can keep time. What time do I have to finish to win the prize?
10 after, you go to 21 after, you
Yeah.
might win the prize.
Yeah, so lots of kind of large-scale projection pieces, as I say, that you can kind of embed yourself in and work around, often to do with the body. So I think the principal thing I'd like to say about that kind of body of work, it's very much been about how we kind of engage in science, and it determines who we are, how we get a concept of self through science, through the imagery of science, and through the kind of theories and ideas that come from the science. So lots of work. This is called We Are Where We Are, and you know, it's a very large-scale projection piece that you can see from outside, but you can also be inside. You can be contained by it, and things gradually drift and change. There's quite a lot of kind of history of I suppose medical imaging in a way, and references to Muybridge, Edward Muybridge, who photographed the locomotion of the horses. You know, the sequential photography is a record of something that we can't see that comes into our kind of world. I was very interested in that. I did a fellowship at Kingston where he was born and died, and where there's a very big collection of his work. So it's very much about being in those kind of worlds and seeing what it was like to react to those kind of senses. Yeah, that's enough of that. Made video works as well. Rosa figure, which kind of has come forward into this kind of project. So I'm going to flip through these, seized out of the world. I've worked with particular medical conditions as well, making works that relate to, in this case, epilepsy and seizure, and looking at what the syndrome is, and then taking that syndrome and applying it to a series of bodies. And they're very complex, so you cannot see. It's 6 projectors all on different schemes with lots of different chapters happening at the same time, and looking at those kind of images. I want to move to what I'm doing now. Okay, because then I'll keep to time. Change of heart. So I've made a number of works already around the topic, and I wanted just to concentrate on those. I mean, they've ended up being kind of video projection. Partly because there's all these kind of implications. The previous work have all been done with slide projection and old-fashioned Kodak projectors. And I've got slide dissolve units that work in the UK that are very complex, but getting them over here and working with other people's power systems is a bit of a nightmare from time to time. So I decided that I would kind of work with projection and use some things that I'd kind of seen kind of work very well. So in terms of the physical nature of it, it's kind of 2 projectors shining onto a wall, but there's a skin of voile on the wall that kind of gives the feel of a kind of holographic kind of image. It also softens the projection in many ways. And what I've been working with is very directly, well, I got known in the project, I suppose, for drawing. And when we were listening to the tapes, the clips of which Heather has shown you, and we were in the room, I would draw. I would react to what was being said. And in the end, I ended up with a sequence of little kind of drawings of people, a kind of stencil that I made lots of drawings of figures, and then started adding things as I heard the tapes. And I was just reacting to those tapes, putting things down. And then what I've done is worked in Photoshop with stacks of images. I took a photograph of one model. I'd spend a morning photographing one model, take 400 photographs. I've got a bank of information that I kind of then use, and they feed into the work. So I've got all these poses, and then I started to look at the drawings and see the relationship between the poses and the images that I had, and kind of begin to incorporate them in a quite not a random way, but just had all of these sequences, and then I put it together as a whole long projection piece that goes over the wall. And the figure, in a sense, kind of lies within a kind of medical figure, an anatomized figure. So it has that kind of whole history, a male figure that things happen to and things change. And what I was very interested from the research, I suppose, was this notion of continually shifting boundaries, not knowing what was going on. So the figures are always moving. It's always in transition. The piece lasts about 20 minutes and kind of moves through these different states where different things happen. It's very long, so that you don't really, you can only concentrate on one bit. So it's unsettling when you watch it, I feel. You're kind of thinking, oh, what's going on over there? You change, you watch that bit, and then you think, oh, I've forgotten what's happening over here. So it's always a kind of movement. And I'm very interested in how the figure keeps reappearing, though, and then something else happens to them. So I just feel as though what I wanted to kind of get was this kind of sense of flux. And in terms of how it looks quite medieval in a sense. It's a kind of got Renaissance kind of anatomical kind of drawing in mind, medieval. As I've mentioned, the kind of Dutch painting is also kind of in the way it's lit. It's kind of like a Francis de la Tour kind of painting. So it's all about those kind of iterations and the reiterations of the person. And it's a kind of what I sense it might be like, because I think as soon as you've had such a massive interruption happen to your body, it's always going to be unsettling. And I was very interested in some of the psychological things that are proposed that might happen to people and what they might think. But even if they're just being asked that, have you changed? It's going to change them, because they're going to have doubt about who they are. And I think that's the kind of world that we live in anyhow. So my works are related to the heart, but kind of generic at the same time. I've continually been distracted, and I got a bit distracted doing this one. I've been in Montreal and looking at things, but again, this drawing thing is really interesting. So I've done a series of drawings that I quite like that I'm working with, and these have come into the projection. And it's this kind of state of process, and even while I've been here, I've been still drawing and kind of making work and having ideas. And the very notion that we've kind of workshopped this process, we've had a team of people working with us, doing things and setting up. All that time has been really important. And little things kind of happen. I mean, I wrote some things on the back of my hand, rushed to the bathroom, washed them off, and suddenly realised, actually, there was text that could happen on the body. So a lot of also has been centred around a piece of soap that was in the apartment that we were in, that I became really interested in. I became fascinated, and I spent several mornings quietly photographing it. I didn't get to the point of kind of emailing the guy that owns the flat and saying, can I have the piece of soap? But I nearly did. But the notion of soap then became important, because it looked kind of slightly organ-like. And then I was thinking, well, what if that organ, what if the soap was a heart? And you hold it. And it kind of gave me that echo of what the patients say. Because when they come out of the operation, they've had the transplant, then they're very concerned about cleanliness and their own, because their immune systems are down. They've got no immune systems. They're going to be on drugs to counter that the whole of their lives. So they're very conscious of that first. So I thought soap was very good. And I kind of like the idea that you wash this soap and also that it might contain something else that you don't know about. So I'm kind of beginning to play with the idea of making something with soap that has another soapy thing inside, like an object. So these are just my quick thoughts while I've been playing around, trying to make a presentation, but actually kind of making work. So some hanging forms of soap, and I like the idea of washing, containment and movement and change. We have the notion now, I've been speaking to Cheryl, that maybe we'll place something in the bathroom, in the WCs here. I mean, they're great sinks down there. They're all stainless steel. They look like a kind of medical world. So kind of placing them there. So I've also made another piece. It's called Lacuna. Kind of interested in this piece in the sense that a lot of work, as an artist, you don't know what it's about, and then you kind of reflect on it. So I had this kind of sequence of people and figures that I've begun to play with, and I kind of wondered what it was about. And I began to gradually, kind of analyse it in my own view, but it seemed to me that it's quite organ-like in shape, and it was very interesting when Heather came in. She said, oh, that's a heart, isn't it? Though it's like that, but it is an organ or a heart, or could be. That I thought was fascinating. And the things that I think that I play with is a kind of defensiveness. So sometimes all the figures are looking out, they're kind of protecting the inner part. Sometimes they're turned in, they're looking, they're being introspective. Sometimes, as it suggests, they're looking down this hole, this gap, this space, this lacuna that might have been created. And I think this is quite interesting because it also echoes the eye, and at a certain point it becomes kind of binocular, and at another point all these figures become stretched out. So again, these are kind of seen as large kind of video projection pieces, and I kind of quite like those. And it echoes of lots of things. Echoes, I think, of the anatomical theatre in a way, the circle, the looking into. Also, thinking about the towers of people that they're making in Tarragona, all of that kind of thing, about defence, about Roman formations, all that these circles have. And I can't help but also mentioning the Busby Merkley movies. They have that echoes of that, so there's a kind of wit in it as well, which I think is quite nice. And I can't help think also of sequential, synchronised swimming. So there's all these kinds of plays, kind of historical plays. And I also think the whole piece is really medieval. It's strangely dark, strangely Breughelian. And another thing that I've been doing, I made a print originally. I can't see it. Right, it's so dark, the image. And it doesn't want to go on. Okay, we've jumped. Where have we jumped to? But another piece that was about ended up about frailty. I made a piece where the figure kind of rotates in a lying position, and the venal system seems to disappear from them, kind of is lifted out. It's become quite spirit-like. It's lifted out and it's replaced. And I can't help think of a number of kind of paintings that have this. This is the kind of Dead Matador by Manet. It seems to have reflections of lots of things and lots of the kind of terminology, because this was a much larger painting that Manet cut up. It did have a bull in it at one time and isolated it as an icon, and that was really interesting. Am I running out of time? Yeah, good. Okay, but these are the kinds of things that I'm interested in, and I'm just going to stop there. So this kind of ethereal things and elements like that. Good.